yeah. It's kind of neat.
It's very rare if you don't.
Right.
So
And we keep meaning to, we're eventually we're gonna make a pilgrimage over to Rockford, to visit Mid-Pointe Church.
is that where he is now?
Yeah, he's at,
Christ the Rock.
Christ the Rock.
In Rockford. And
It's
he
like
was,
between Belvedere and Rockford.
Yeah.
Not very far drive.
they still do a Saturday night service. So, you know, you could date night, go to their service and then grab something to eat in Rockford. Some good restaurants out there. So, maybe. See, I didn't tell you. So I was in Rockford this week. My boys live out there, and there's a place by the river. They like to kayak, and I was walking around the lake with my son, and we stopped. You know, we went to use the restroom before we left. We sat on this.
beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We are united in Jesus. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. In our hearts we have a vision. We have made our decision to show the Father's love with great power from above. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. Let us reach this generation, every tribe and every nation, for we've overcome the world by the blood of Christ the Lamb. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. Lord our God is a sword and shield. Lord our God is a sword and shield. Lord our God is a sword and shield. Lord our God is a sword and tower. Lord our God is a sword and the rock of faith. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. Lord our God is a sword and shield. The Lord our God is a sword and shield. Lord our God is a sword and shield. Lord our God is a mighty tower. Lord our God is a sword and the rock of faith. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We too are marching to one beat, crushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We are mighty.
But I'm wondering, it's nice.
We have that part.
Good morning. And welcome today. I'm glad you're all here. I'm going to start with just, the usual reminders. Everybody, there's a bulletin by the front. If everybody's got that, if you'd like to follow along, you can, or take notes. For those of you that are joining us from home, on the YouTube under the screen, there's a place you can download those. there's a sign-in sheet, so you can let us know that you were here with us today. Online, there's the little thumbs up or just to let us know that you've joined us today. So I want to thank you all for coming. I'm Kimberley Schumacher, and I'm here to explore the idea of guarding our marriages with you today. So I'm going to share some ideas, but I want you guys to share back so we all can learn from each other today. The series that we're in is Guarding Your Heart, right? So we've heard from Don. He helped us share some struggles that men have and how we guard our hearts against those. Laura shared some resources for women. Missy did a great job of showing us what we're missing when we let screens get in the way of things. So today we're going to talk about marriages. If you would just pray with me. I'm going to start just by inviting God into this space with us. Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you are to us, for the marriages that you've given us and the time that we have this morning. Please guide our hearts and our minds. Help us find what you have for us in this information, and be with us as we continue on in our week. Amen. So, I'm gonna rely on my notes a lot. I do this when we in our small group we'll take turns for just kind of exploring some different ideas. I just want to make sure that I catch everything that I have for you today. So I'll start out with me just a little bit. I'm a child of divorce. I'm a grown child of divorce. My first marriage lasted 17 years, and then through brokenness it died. I'm right now in I think our 16th year of marriage in my blended family. So you could say, oh my gosh, what does she have to share about marriage? But I've got a lot. I mean, Don reminded us a few weeks ago, right, that when we're honest with our brokenness, we get to learn. So if that's true, I've got a lot that I've learned. Today, I'm going to flip over. Tell me if you see in this picture, does this look like somebody who's guarding or fighting a battle? Are you shaking your head? Yeah?
I actually can't really see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So what we're looking at, no, that's okay. What we're looking at is a picture of a couple on a dock out in a lake community. They're by themselves. They're kind of clenched in prayer. There's no armor. There's no weapons. There's nobody else to help them. It's just the two of them. Or is it? How many presences do you see there? Three? So at least three, right? So there's the husband, there's the wife. They're clenched in prayer. They've invited God into that. And then there's their marriage, which is existing. And you can think of your marriage as a third person, or you can think of it as us coming together and being one, right? But there's you and there's your spouse. You bring God into it, and your marriage has a life of its own. So today I'm going to present some ideas. We're going to talk about some things that you've heard before, that it's good to be reminded of. We might talk about some things that might be a little awkward, but awkward things need to be talked about sometimes. And I'm going to present some ideas. So the first idea that I'm looking at is that marriage has a life of its own. So I'm going to put this up here so we're reminded of it. So that's the first idea that I'd like to present to you this morning, that our marriage, just besides you and me, our marriage has a life of its own. So what is marriage? Okay, so I'm going to present 4 ideas there. And the first, I'm going to go through some scripture. We're going to entertain some ideas from the Bible, and then we're going to entertain some ideas about the world. The first thing, when I started to work on this presentation, my Bible is a study Bible, and it has a concordance in the back, and I said, marriage. What does God's Word have to say about marriage? And I went and I read as much as I could, and then I pulled out some of those ideas, and I said, okay, these are what I found. So the very first verse that came up to me was Romans 7:2. And if you have these Bibles, I tried to do a better job of putting the page numbers in the bulletin. So we're on page 131. Romans 7:2 says, by law, a married woman is bound to her husband as long as he is alive. But if the husband dies, she's released from the law that binds her to him. So marriage is binding. Matthew 19:4-6 tells us, and I'm going to go ahead and read these. So if you want to explore them more when you get home, the references are there. It says, haven't you read, he replied, that in the beginning the Creator made them male and female. Am I reading in the right place? Yes. Okay. And said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So it's a joining. First Kings talks about marriage in more of an alliance. It talks about how the king's daughter might marry somebody else and they would form an alliance. So the first thing that we look at is marriage as an alliance or a contract. The world might say you need a license. It involves the courts. You need to go back to court in order to dissolve that marriage. So the contractual portion of it is what the world sees. The other thing that's different between how the world views marriage and how Christians view marriage is the long-standingness of it. So the Bible doesn't change. It's God's truth. But the way we see things in common culture might change. So this is a Funk and Waggles dictionary. It's been around for a long time. The definition here is that marriage is a state of being married, a legal contract entered into by a man and a woman to live together as husband and wife or in wedlock. So they're joined, man and woman in wedlock, they're locked together and bound together. Today's idea of marriage might be a little different in common culture. It might not be the same. If we were to pull up dictionary.com, we would find different things than what we see here. We would find that it's a contractual agreement between two people living together. So culture might change, but marriage and what God sees in marriage doesn't change over time. So the second thing that marriage is intimacy. It's an exclusive companionship or intimacy. Genesis page 3 is another verse that came up when I was looking and saying, what is marriage? The man said, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united and they become one flesh. So that there's intimacy in that. In 1 Corinthians, in the New Testament, we're given more support. Those verses 7:2 and 7:9 that you see on your bulletin, they say basically the same thing. So it's that consistency through Old Testament, all the way from Genesis through the New Testament, through what we get from the Bible today, is the same. Hebrews 13:4, which is on page 1214, says marriage is to be held in honor among all things. So that intimacy in marriage, it's honorable, it's beautiful. Marriage is also sacrificial love. Right? So husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Go back to page 11, 76 and 77. I know this is a lot, but wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as you would unto the Lord. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. So in Colossians, if you go to Colossians, it says almost the same thing. In my study Bible, there's the beginning of each book tells us a little bit about the authorship and why the author wrote what they wrote. So if you look at the book of Ephesians is Paul's letter to the church for establishing the church. And yet he talks about marriage in that as a part of it. In Colossians, there's a different purpose to the writing. In Colossians, Paul is addressing heresy and mysticism and talking about the importance and the authority of Christ in the church. But he still talks about marriage. He still brings marriage into that. He actually compares Christ and the church to marriage, right? He calls the church the bridegroom, or he calls Jesus the bridegroom. So, is it possible that marriage has a larger purpose than just you and me building a life? Marriage has, yeah, it does. It's foundational to the family. So that's idea number 2. I'm gonna put up here. I do my marker. So idea number 2 is that marriage has a bigger purpose than just the 2 people involved. Marriage is also transformation, right? And I've read the verse a couple of times, the 2 become one flesh. But if you read in Ephesians, the verse that talks about becoming one flesh, it follows up by saying, but I'm talking about the church and Christ. So just as Christ is transformational, when we get married, something changes, right? Our life is different from that point forward. Our life is just, something has changed. So there's enduring truths, Genesis through Ephesians, and Christ is our example of that. What we see in Christ and what we see in salvation and the brokenness that he restores. Our marriage is an example of that love, right, between Christ and the church. So that's the third idea, that sacrifice is transformational. And that's what we're talking about in research.
Said sacrifice is transformation.
I said, thank you for bringing that up. If I missed it, sacrifice. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's through sacrifice that we can be the Christ sacrifice that we're transformed. Right. So there was brokenness and sin.
Right.
And Christ, we were in a broken state, and Christ went to the cross, and we have salvation, and that's transformational. In marriage, there's you and there's me. Coming together one flesh, we are transformed because our life from that point forward has changed. Just like with salvation, when Christ died for us, we were forever changed. So we're kind of putting those 2 ideas together, the church and marriage. So I want to ask next, in marriage, if that's what marriage is, what are we guarding? All of it? All of it. All of it. We're guarding salvation. We're guarding all that we have in marriage. We have joy, companionship, our partner in crime. We're guarding our legacy. We're guarding the teachings that we give our children as they go on to teach their children, the covenants that man has with God. We're guarding all of that when we guard our marriage. But we can't do any of that if me and my spouse aren't together on things. If we're not, if we haven't brought Christ into our marriage and we don't learn what that means. On the world side of things, there were a couple things I found when I said, why do we get married? Why do we enter into this covenant if it's something that's going to change our lives? And you can tell me if these are good reasons or bad reasons, right? Some of them make sense. Brides.com said, you should get married if you truly trust your partner deeply. That's a good reason. If you fight fairly. I hope we fight fairly. If you spent a lot of time together. If you know the person at a deeper level. And if you want the same things. So all of that's good, right? That's not bad, but is it foundational? Legal Lion said financial equity. You bring your financial equity together. You get shared health insurance. It's a good reason. Right? The children's father is legally recognized. That's important. Breakup can be more costly. Now, I've been through divorce and I've been through breakups. I don't know that breakups are less costly than divorce. Divorce can be pretty costly. Or if you marry, you're forfeiting your children's Social Security and your later spousal Social Security. So those are why legal lions, that's what she did. Those are, I mean, they're facts, they're real. But another source that's probably a little closer to the way we think about things, focus on the family, gives us some more foundational reasons, right? So James Dobson and Focus on the Family and the pastors that he worked with, they came up with these. They have this on the website, and you can check this out on the website if you like. Marriage is the cornerstone of a stable society. History shows the strength of any nation depends on the strength of its families. Definitely a bigger purpose than just me and my husband. Wow. Marriage is a sacred covenant between the couple and God. During a wedding ceremony, the man and woman take a vow in front of God and their witnesses. So it's beyond just me and my husband. What we're doing, we're building here with our marriage. Marriage has benefits for individuals. Compared to single people, marriages are happier. People in marriages are happier, healthier. They save more. They're wealthier. They have. I feel like I have to pause before I say this, but they have better sex than anybody on the planet. That's what James Dobson said. And there are 1,138 benefits, rights, and protections under the law if you're married than if you're just together. Marriage is the best way to raise children. They fare better in school, they exhibit fewer behavioral problems, and they're more likely to form healthy romantic relationships as adults because they've seen it modeled. They've had that before them. And marriage helps us become more Christ-like through love, reconciliation, and successfully navigating trials. So those, I think, are all really, really good reasons. And in there, again, there's all of that we're guarding. Our children, our bond, their future, the world's perspective of the church, all of that is part of what we're guarding. So this is just a little legacy slide, some pictures, some things that relate to that. My favorite is the one with the little girl and the old man and that connection, that generational connection. So on legacy, Genesis 17:9, I'm just going to read through these, says that God said to Abraham, as far as you must keep my covenants and your descendants after you for generations to come. So for his promise is good not just for us, but for generations to come. Psalm 103, 17 and 18, but from everlasting to everlasting the Lord's love is with those who fear him, and his righteousness with their children's children who keep this covenant. So again, that purpose and that transformation of what our life becomes after that is huge. Unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders build in vain. And this is from Psalm 127. Children are a heritage to the Lord, and offspring a reward from him. So again, all of this to bring God into our marriage, the importance of that. So if I summarize, we're guarding the life of our marriage. It has a purpose bigger than ourselves. And where Christ's relationship to the church is our example, we're guarding that transformed future. We're guarding against sin and brokenness. And if we look at the church, that sin and brokenness started in the garden. It's the same place love started, in the garden. So some of that sin and brokenness comes from internal forces that we can control, and some of it comes from external forces that we have to manage or be a part of. If we look at the internal forces, things that we bring to the table, what do we find?
Selfishness.
Pardon?
Selfishness?
Selfishness.
Do you mean like positive internal forces or negative?
Well, these would be just both, right? So, what are some of the forces that affect our marriage?
Our upbringing and our baggage.
Yeah. I'm gonna put that over here. So it's kind of something that happened to us. It's not something that we bring to the table.
Like our goals.
Pardon?
Our goals.
Our goals. Yeah.
Morals and values.
Values. And those could be positive or not so positive, depending on where that falls, right?
The promise that we made or the love that we just have.
So, love, promise, commitment, right? That we made.
See the negative societal norms.
Okay, so yeah.
Peer pressure, well, I don't know, just, what is the, isn't it still 50% of marriages worldwide end? Or, you know, I'm thinking about the norm.
Yeah. Common pop culture or modern culture is something that's an external force.
What about your like family and friends? Oh, that's under peers. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay, because that's, yeah,
You know,
peers, friends.
and family.
Family.
External forces could be jobs or whatever else you're doing outside of the family.
Yep. Jobs or career. And that's kind of, our goals are, right, related to our goals a little bit.
The culture of the job you're doing, the culture of the company.
The culture at work.
I still liked her upbringing. I think, yes, upbringing is external, but it does become a part of us, which
Yes.
complicates. So I kind of agree with you.
Okay. I'm not even sure how to, is family intuition or something?
It may be like your views on marriage,
Okay.
Or what a marriage looks
But I
like.
think,
or what it looks like.
I think your upbringing like flows into your values and your morals. Like you could just draw some arrows up there. You know.
Yeah, you can like
I'm kidding.
some of this, right? It could be, some of them belong in both camps.
I think your personality really comes into play too.
Okay.
External forces are kids.
Yeah.
Love them all.
Absolutely.
What about health?
Pardon?
Health.
Oh,
yeah.
Health? Oh, man. I'm gonna put that right here, right?
And mental health.
Mental health? Okay.
Addiction.
Yeah. So I was considering it, I was like, wow, you guys did a lot better than I did. It's like their busyness, right? Self-interest, fear of rejection. Even in a marriage where you're close, and this is the person closest to you, sometimes there's a fear of rejection, expectation, external, I said temptation, culture, demanding jobs, others. So you guys did a really, really good job. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. We consider, and some of it we don't need to guard against. Some of it we embrace, but they're all things that we need to be aware of. That's for sure. One of the other things I put down here is our view of the world's view of what we're supposed to be. So we're kind of affected by that too. Kind of affected by what the world's view of marriage is or what we're supposed to be. All of these, there's a lot there to manage. But again, it's not just me and my spouse, it's me and my spouse, and we bring God back into that. When we don't bring God back into that, when we don't bring God into it, what happens?
Focus on those issues.
They become bigger than our marriage. They could. Because we see those things instead of the things that instead of the societal effect of our marriage, the positive things, the generational change in our children. experience with God as part of their life, their full family. So those things can lead to brokenness. And sometimes brokenness happens. Sometimes brokenness happens for reasons beyond our control, right? So if somebody dies, that's not something we can control. But it sure brings a lot of brokenness, and it brings a lot of stress, and it brings a lot of hurt into a marriage, or if it's a marriage partner that dies. So there's widows, and there's divorce, and there's addiction or abuse, or there's all of these other things, these internal and external forces that we're guarding our heart, and we're guarding our family and our children, and our lives and our marriage from. And the answer to this kind of brokenness is the same as the answer to other brokenness, right? Christ died on the cross, Christ's sacrifice. And that's why it's so important to bring that in. Christ reconciled people to God. He reconciled the church to heaven. And if he's there as part of that reconciliation in your marriage, and he's constant, and we're nurturing that, then all of these things we bring in our prayer life, or we bring to our Father, and we say, Lord, oh my gosh, these kids, they're awesome, they're fantastic, they are a gift, but boy, I'm tired. I've been to soccer, I've been to cheerleading, we had homework, and then there were music lessons, and when do I find time to do other things? So, Lord, the family I grew up in, they were awesome, they were wonderful. Maybe it was a nuclear family, Lord, but there are expectations from my parents on how I raise my kids, and I want to follow your will and be the person you want me to be. There, that pressure. Lord, thank you for a family that raised me with Christian values, and my husband with Christian values, so that we could help us bring that to our children. So all of these forces, they can be good or they can be bad. You can join forces and fight against the things that are challenging. Or if it's you and it's me, then I'm preoccupied with all of this. My mother expects me to do this, or the kids, I do all of this, or whatever it is, I'm preoccupied. And then my husband comes home and he's preoccupied because he's had a day of demands and pressures and other things, external forces pushing on him. We come together and we give thanks, and we remember that there's a third person, and we're not all in this all by ourselves, and that we have a bigger purpose. We have the purpose of bringing God's message to our kids and our next generations. And we remember that society is better because of the example of our family that we bring, the example of Christ in the church that we bring and that we live out. So Jesus is huge. Jesus' sacrifice and salvation as an answer to our brokenness, that makes all the difference. It makes all the difference, I think, in life and in our marriages. Any thoughts? Anybody have thoughts on that? On the comparison between marriage and the church?
I think it kind of teaches us to be part of something bigger than ourselves, the marriage, and then follows on being a Christian means you're part of something that's much bigger than you.
So it is a part of being something big, or being a part of something much bigger than ourselves. Yeah.
I think it's obviously enormous and huge and the whole big picture, but it's so hard in the current moment of, like you were talking about, you and your husband come home from work and you have things on your mind, and then I know you have grandkids, but like throw the 4 and the 6-year-old in, and then you're like stressed and they're screaming and they're touching Jill and she doesn't like to be touched, and it's just chaos all the time, and it is hard. Like one of the things that stuck out when Laura was talking was about the prioritization of, it's supposed to be God and then your spouse and then your kids.
Yep.
And yes, I just turned this into a kid conversation, but like to actually have that to be an everyday in and out where you're prioritizing your wife or husband over the kids when the kids need so much all the time, is very difficult. And I think at the end of the day when the kids are sleeping, that's when it's like, take a deep breath and you can then show and talk but it's hard.
It is hard. Thank you for that. It is hard. Thank you for that. Yeah. And their need, the children, and we still experience this when we have like grandchildren for the weekend. People our age should not have children that are small for very long. So we get a little dose of that reminder, right, over the weekends. But because their need is immediate.
Correct.
Right? They need you now. They just fell or they have a band or whatever. Their need is immediate. So it is very hard. But you mentioned something else. You mentioned carving out time at the end of the day, right? When you're exhausted, right? But it is important.
And then it goes back to Missy's conversation about at the end of the day when you're exhausted, putting your phones in your pockets so you can have real conversations as opposed to,
And believe me, I'm the first to say, easier said than done.
For
You
sure.
are exhausted. I mean, this is easier because it's
For
passive.
sure.
That takes
Yeah.
it's hard.
Absolutely. I want to go back, revisit that hierarchy you talked about, right? Because in a traditional family, it's hard, right, with the kids and everything. In a blended family, now we have these tensions, right? Mom, and that's my dad, and why, and so does the hierarchy change? It's a tricky question, right? It's a really tricky question. I would submit to you that it doesn't. Those urgent needs of your children and their love and the reinforcement of security is really, really important. But without that foundation, without that base, if they can't trust you and your husband to be together, then the world becomes a really scary place. Because they've already experienced some kind of loss. They've experienced a death, or they've experienced a divorce, or they've experienced some other loss. And so that foundation isn't so secure. The church and the family, it's not so secure. So if the second marriage is going to endure, if the second marriage is going to become all that those verses that I kind of clumsily walked through, right? If it's going to become that foundation and an example of Christ's love for the church, where you're going to find forgiveness and you're going to find tolerance, if it's going to become that, you and your husband, that God and the marriage and the children, I would suggest that that's important to maintain that hierarchy. And that's a really tough one. Yes, Dave?
No, I think so. Quite frankly, I think hierarchy and day-to-day focus are two different things. I think the hierarchy is the umbrella over it, but your momentary focus doesn't necessarily always have to be God. In fact, God would have wanted that way. He's equipped us to be able to handle and prioritize without ever losing sight of the big picture.
Absolutely. I had a little bit of a hard time hearing you, so I'm going to try and restate a little bit. You were saying that that there's a difference between hierarchy and the needs of the day, the demands that need to.
Yeah, just saying. So hierarchy that's always there. That's foundational. The hierarchy is the hierarchy.
Yep.
But the fact that you need to focus on your kids, even though they're third in the hierarchy, doesn't take away from the hierarchy.
The urgency of their needs doesn't, right.
Yeah, doesn't.
He used the term umbrella, like it's the umbrella over it all. That's what he said.
Right. Yep. Marriage, is the umbrella, and the kids' needs they have to be.
Enables you to focus appropriately because you have the hierarchy in place, right? If the hierarchy is yourself and God is a different hierarchy, the manner in which you focus may not be appropriate or may not be.
Right. So I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, in fact, when you were saying that about like how you were thinking about Jill's needs, even when you were describing the chaos, I thought you were still kind of putting her first, even in the way that you were saying, oh, I need to, react this way. It was still kind of having her above because this was an immediate need and you were thinking about how that would impact her. So there's like the seasons of life where, it is your whole day while they're awake is the kids, but then when they're in bed, you're kind of able to refocus a little bit. But I just thought that it was sweet that even in your description of how you're putting kids first, you were talking about your wife. That makes you yeah.
Well, I think in a healthy, I don't know. I think ideally, that's how God designed it and intended it. That every decision, like when you're truly in love, like that person, it may not be, as you're saying, in the instant all the time. If you have that hierarchy and that person is the very top of the hierarchy in terms of other human beings, then yeah, you do kind of subconsciously make decisions and think the whole time about that, ideally. I wish that was always the case, but I think that's how it's designed.
I think so.
I don't know, I could be wrong.
Just one other thought sort of on the hierarchy, and I think where you're going, Kimberly, is about, you know, how we could guard ourselves against negative influences. The biggest challenge is that two people are coming together and their hierarchies are different, or God isn't within one of the two hierarchies. There's no foundation. That's the thing. Everything can crumble before you even start.
Right. Without that foundation, and you're very right. So I had two follow-ups to that. One is, what does it mean to have a blended family, right? And the thought that I had there was, it means that people who were broken learn to love again, right? They learn to accept God's love, to try and share that again. So they're trying again. The other thing is, like Dave was saying, that foundation, when there's more of everything, right? If you think about it, in a blended family, there's more in-laws, there's more parents, there's more kids than there would have been otherwise. There's more family culture, there's more people with goals, there's more teaching, there's tears, there's more joy, there's more challenges, there's more historic brokenness. So it requires more grace, more humility, more patience, more understanding, more connecting to that solid foundation and that hierarchy, being that model of security, trying to rebuild and restore that. But they're also the same needs that you would have in a traditional marriage, right? There's still, Christ needs to be at the center of it. It's still a contract and covenant. We still require the support. I think somebody mentioned it, I'm not sure who, the support of friends and family, going out with other couples that are married, building that support system. The sacrificial love is still part of that marriage. So blended families are similar to traditional families in what they have and the struggles. Sometimes there's more, sometimes it's harder. All the more reason for God's grace to be a part of that marriage. All the more reason for husband and wife to come together and battle. So that came from Focus on the Family and their write-ups on blended families. And if you're interested, or how many people here know of somebody who is part of a blended family? Yeah, there's very few people that don't, right? I mean, even in the case of losing my brother, she went on to remarry, and there were children already, right? So today's culture is full of them, and it's something that I think is important to understand or to investigate, or even if it isn't part of our world, because our children and their cousins, and they're all, we're all experiencing part of that. So we've talked a lot about, just now, about brokenness and priority and guarding our heart, guarding our marriage. The good news is, with all of that, we're equipped, right? So God has equipped us. Humility, Psalm 139, 23 and 24 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting." Search my heart and let me be humble, and let me see the bigger picture. I wanted to tell a story, and I love this story because people think of humility as meekness, and it is meekness, but there can be great strength in humility. So there was a mom and a stepfather in the car, and they picked up a boy in junior high from school, and they're all in the car together, and the stepdad says, "So, how was your day at school?" And the boy's excited. He's like, "Oh, it was awesome. In fact, I've got something I want to share with you." And stepdad says, "Okay," and mom's interested now. So he says, "I'm doing this project for language arts, and we had to write a poem. Would you like to hear my poem?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, I want to hear the poem." The poem goes on to talk about this monster that's invaded the son's life. It's awful, and it's foreign, and it's weird, and no authority will come over this young man. He'll fight against it to the death. And at the end of the poem, the monster is identified as a stepfather. Now, brokenness, sadness, anger, all of these emotions could be part of that conversation. But the stepfather sits back, takes a minute, takes a breath, and says, "I'm familiar with that cadence, or the verses that you're trying to put together on the grammaric side. I'm familiar with that, and I think if you tweaked this little bit here, it might be a little different. You might get a better grade." And the son looks at me and he's like, "Oh." And the two of them talk about the tactical nature of writing poetry. And the boy's like, "Thanks, man, that was awesome." But the humility that stepfather had to swallow, or not fight back, or not say, "Hey, I love you. What do you think that what you think of me?" None of that. He had to humble. He had to be it wasn't about him. The poem definitely was about him, but the situation was not about him. It was about what that boy was trying to communicate. And so humility can be very, very strong if we understand it. It can bring strength, and it can strengthen our families. Does that make sense? Does everybody follow it? Yeah.
I like that. Well, I don't know if this is quite what you're saying, so maybe if you correct me, almost just like the security in our knowledge of ourselves allows us to be humble in a situation where we have to defend ourselves.
I like that. That's a little different than what I was illustrating, but I like that. That's definitely part of it. If we are secure in our knowledge of who we are, our identity in Christ, and we're solid with our spouse in the marriage that God has given us, then we can take a breath, and it's okay to be humble. It doesn't have to be about us. It doesn't have to be our brokenness. We can be strong, and we can focus on helping others. Yeah, I like that.
Can you describe the Christian difference between being a doormat and constantly standing up for yourself?
So that's a tricky one. I'm not a professional. I like your point. I understand your point, right? Because if we have to shrink every time there's a challenge, then we get worn down. So that's definitely not what God would want for us. He would want that identity, to strengthen our identity. So if it's something that is occurring over and over and over again, then that might be an opportunity for counseling, or for finding somebody to help that couple walk through that difficult nature.
It's not him.
No. But it's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, because humility isn't always becoming less than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty common, I think, in blended families, where one group of kids is going to maybe push back against the step on both sides, and it's a fine line to walk.
It's a fine line to
A
navigate.
fine line to walk, but you have to be very, like you said, very, very solid with your spouse, and maybe after that, like maybe one of my kids is doing something like that, and I just pull off to the side and say, "Look, I love you, but this is my wife, and I love her, and there's nothing you're going to be able to do to break us up." So you just get that out of your mind.
And our relationship, father and son, father and child, right? Our relationship isn't dependent on that. This new spouse doesn't minimize my love for you. This new spouse doesn't minimize my commitment to you and all I have for you. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot of that. But it takes a lot of that raising kids anyway, right? Blended family or traditional family. There are stressors in blended families, but I think the answers are the same. It's a lot to navigate. To do. So humility is one of the tools that we have to guard our heart and guard our marriages with. The armor of God, some of these answers are the same answers that we hear from the Bible in guarding our own heart, our heart as a man, our heart as a woman, guarding our marriage. But they're truths, they're solid truths that endure. The armor of God is found in Ephesians chapter 6, 14 through 18. The ones that I looked at and said, geez, I think these apply to marriage are the belt of truth, right? We always want to be honest, that truth, God's truth, that's what we want to come back and focus on. The readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. We want to keep peace in our households, even when we're angry and frustrated. We want to make sure that peace, the shield of faith, the faith that we're passing on to our kids. God's presence is another one of the tools that we have to help guard us. God's presence in our marriage, that first picture of the couple praying. And prayer. Do you guys pray together? Does anybody pray with their spouse? Yeah? Yeah? I think some of the things that come out of that, you experience comfort and brokenness together. The humility, if you both come before God and you experience that together. You experience shared petitions, right? You come to God and you say, God, this person in my spouse's family is hurting, and we're coming together, and we want, we want to be a part of that solution. Or you strengthen the bond of your family because you pray for your kids together, and you both want the same thing, and that's reinforced in your prayer. So praying together is more than just coming before God and asking. Praying builds that relationship and solidifies that third person in your marriage. So we've only got a little bit more time. I want to make sure that that we talk a little strategically. How do we guard? What are some things we can do to guard our marriage? But I'm going to quick summarize. We're guarding the life of our marriage, a purpose bigger than ourselves, the transformation that God's brought to our lives, the new life through our legacy and our generations, the church and what marriage means to society. When brokenness enters, Christ provides reconciliation. We're equipped to heal and fight against external forces. God's presence and prayer become invited into the covenant to our marriage, and we're not alone. We're equipped and we have a partner. So that's my quick summary. Does anybody have anything else to add or any other thoughts about that, or the things that we've talked about? What marriage is or what we're guarding? Anybody have any questions about this?
I just think that prayer is just so important. I mean, I have a blended family. My husband has 2 kids from his first marriage. And, just the struggles, and it's the prayer, just everyday praying has just made a huge difference. Huge.
Yeah. And I don't think it has to be anything huge. I mean, it doesn't have to be a half hour that you put at the end of your day and spend. In practice, Dave and I, we don't pray together a lot. We really don't. But every day at mealtime, before we have dinner, when it's just the 2 of us, we talk about, what's important, what's going on, and we might just pray. And that's how it started. That's how we started praying together. It was just, thanks for this meal, Lord, at first, and then it was thanks for this meal, and we know this person's hurting. Can you help? Can you just be in that person's life? And then it grew into something a little bit more. So but that constant rhythm, just like any other relationship building piece, that constant rhythm of prayer. I mean, we start out at the altar in church or with a pastor, and the first thing he does is pray over us. And so we continue that. So I'm going to get rid of all this real quick while we have time. What other strategies, other than praying together, what other strategies are things that can help us strengthen our marriage or guard against those?
Communication.
Oh gosh, big, huge, right? Communication. Communication is huge. What else?
I'm gonna throw on there with communication, listening with the intent of understanding.
Oh, yes.
Not fixing, not giving you just understand.
Maybe fighting under there too.
Fighting? Like helping them, but.
Yeah. And to tell a story, it's what, Kimberley mentioned that she was, her first marriage was 17 years. Well, my first marriage was almost 20. And when Kimberley and I started dating, I think the first couple of years, we had more knockdown, drag-out fights between the two of us in 2 years than my ex-wife and I had in 20.
Because if you stop talking, what happens?
This resentment builds up.
Yeah.
Fighting really is a way of communicating.
Oh, absolutely.
You need help in
As
that.
long as we do it fairly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like Bryce.com, right? Do it fairly, fight fairly.
Yeah, and even if you do it, I mean, I think there has to be some underlying trust and commitment there, but even if you do it unfairly, I can't even tell you how often Joel and I will not fight fairly. But the reality
So it's
is,
all of us.
it still comes back.
We bring it back, and we always try to come full full circle, not go to bed angry and, you know.
And we try to figure it out in the end, but trust me, we have insulted each other more times than you probably will.
Well, it's just human nature.
Yeah, but you always bring it around, right? You always come back to, I appreciate that, absolutely. What other strategies would we have for?
Spending time together, not easy when they're 2, 4, and 6, but you'll get there, but just spend time together.
I was going to say the same. So we just celebrated our 6-year wedding anniversary yesterday. And so we're doing something later on in the month. But I was like, we need to go out. Like, what are we going to do? And so my mother-in-law watched the kids last night, and so we just went to Violet Lane. And I'm like, okay, it is 6:30. What else are we going to do? We're not going home. And he's like, I don't know, where are you going to go? I walk around Menards, and he's like, how do you want to do this? And then I was like, okay, now it's like, maybe it's only 7:30. Like, can we go like at a Starbucks and sit down and drink like a order coffee? Like, so that's what we did, and like spending that time and taking that time together. Like, yeah, didn't cost a lot. It took a couple hours of our evening, but like that was.
I knew a coworker once who was terrified that his twin kids were going away to school because it was going to be he and his wife in the house. And they had been so busy with the boys, right? So if we keep that rhythm of spending time together, date nights, or going away on vacation together, or Dave. Oh, I'm sorry, you were raising your, I thought you were raising your hand. Yeah, so yeah, if we make a point, if we make a point of spending that time together, yes.
It's part of communication, but to tell your spouse that you love them is important.
Ooh.
Some people have trouble doing that. I think that's a problem.
That reminder, that's absolutely.
And I would throw on there, I know that Jan, I don't know the verse, but that I see you verse.
Yes.
You know, like I see you.
Yes, yes. That being known, right? Acknowledgement of being known, huge. Oh, yeah.
I did have a point, but I was interrupting you, so I didn't.
Oh, okay.
But a slight pivot, sort of, just on the whole talk about, this is about blended marriages and whatnot, but quite frankly, sort of more broadly, at least kind of thinking about this, anyone who's married is in a blended marriage because it's two families that are coming together, right? I mean, so, and I only bring that up because sort of the conflicts that exist within marriages are sometimes, like you're so grounded in how you grew up and the way things were and the way you did things, and it happens to be, even if you've got sort of the same perspectives on God, you're coming from different families, different points of views, so a lot of conflict just naturally comes into those different points of view. And the key thing, like in terms of guarding, is that you really do have to humble yourself and be, a good listener and accepting of the fact that there isn't one particular way to live your life.
Absolutely.
So there's a tremendous amount of patience and compromise that goes into any marriage.
Absolutely. One more you had?
Mine is more of the wish list, and it's a little bit of like expectations versus like societal pressures, or just setting realistic expectations. The pictures in the PowerPoint were lovely, but I don't know that I've ever been in this fabulous flowing dress with hammered out on one knees, and nor have we been in like sorry.
Like in northern Wisconsin, sitting on the pier with perfect colors with our, so, you know, they're lovely pictures, but I think, like, if that is what society thinks marriage is, we are all set up for failure.
Yes, very, very good.
Sorry.
And I know that the time's low, and to kind of wrap up what both of them saying is, I think coming together as a couple and building that wall against the outside and saying, this is our family and this is the way we're doing it.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I know mom and dad don't think that way, and I know
Yeah.
society doesn't think this way, but this is what we do.
Yeah, this is what marriage is to us. This is ours.
It's like
Absolutely.
thinking about it as a team. In my,
Yes.
like having somebody that grew up like playing sports all the time, like one of the things you have to learn the hard way when you're young is like, why are they subbing me out right now for this guy? The game's on the line type thing. They're more equipped right now, you know. And like I think the doormat versus that question is like if you're constantly thinking as a team of like who is more equipped right now to blah, who's more like who needs to take the step back right now, and if you're constantly thinking about the other person and the other person thinking about you, I think that is easier to do.
And I feel like when you're like a team, like the biggest decisions, at least for us, are the easiest ones. And then like the small decisions are the ones you get in a fight about, but then it's like, I actually really don't care. I'll let him get this one. Like, yeah, that's fine. We can pay this room for you. Doesn't matter.
Thank you all for sharing your perspectives and your ideas, because I hope you got some new ideas. I certainly did from you, so I appreciate that. Next week, Don Kearley is going to come and he's going to talk about sexual purity in marriage. He plans to spend most of the time addressing sexual temptation and challenges that our children are faced with overwhelmingly in today's culture. So I hope you'll join us then. I hope you'll join us online. I'm just going to quickly pray us out. Again, I want to thank you for the discussion and all of your ideas that added to all of our learning today. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time to consider how important it is to guard our marriages, to guard our families, to guard our hearts. Thank you for the lessons we've learned through brokenness and the way it might bring us closer to you and to understanding your love, your church, and the salvation that we have through Jesus Christ. Be with each one of us as we go our separate ways, and I pray that you would bless the families represented here and at home and all who this message touches with your purpose, your comfort, and your love. Amen.